Imagine waking up one day to find your country is the wealthiest in the world. Dreams of luxury become reality, yet in the blink of an eye, it all crumbles into despair. This is the bittersweet story of Nauru, a tiny island paradise in the Pacific Ocean. From being one of the richest nations per capita to facing poverty, environmental ruin, and uncertainty. But what went wrong? In this video, we'll uncover the incredible rise and tragic fall of Nauru. Let's dive into the captivating history of Nauru, a small yet remarkable nation. Located in the Pacific Ocean, just south of the equator, Nauru is the third smallest country in the world, spanning only about 21 square kilometers, similar in size to Nuku'alofa, the capital of Tonga. Despite its modest size and remote location, Nauru's history is rich and fascinating, stretching back thousands of years before its dramatic transformation into a land of extraordinary wealth. The first people to settle on Nauru were the Micronesians and Polynesians explorers, who arrived around 3,000 years ago with evidence of early societies and culture. These early settlers brought with them advanced skills in navigation, fishing, farming, and community living. They discovered the small isolated island in the vast Pacific Ocean and turned it into their home. Over time, they established a society that thrived on the natural resources of the land and sea. Despite its size, the island's people were self-sufficient. They relied on coconuts, pandanus, and breadfruit trees for food, while the surrounding ocean provided an abundant supply of fish. Life on Nauru was simple but harmonious. The island was divided into 12 clans, each with its own identity and role within the larger community. By the 18th century, Nauru's population was around 1,200 people. This peaceful existence continued for centuries, largely unaffected by the outside world. This isolation persisted until 1978, when British captain John Fern stumbled upon the island during his travels. He named it Pleasant Island, in admiration of its lush greenery and the warm welcome from its people. For the next 100 years, Nauru continued to exist quietly, maintaining its traditions and way of life, largely undisturbed by external influences. However, this changed in 1888, when Germany claimed Nauru as part of its Pacific Empire. The Germans introduced firearms, alcohol, and imported goods, disrupting the islander's way of life. By the late 19th century, interclan conflict had escalated, and the population began to decline. The introduction of foreign diseases further weakened the community. Then, in 1900, a discovery changed Nauru's fate forever. A British company identified massive phosphate deposits beneath the island's surface. Phosphate, essential for agricultural fertilizers, was in high demand globally. The phosphate deposits found on this island were some of the richest and purest in the world. With this discovery, Nauru went from being a remote island to a valuable colonial possession and a key player in the global fertilizer industry. But this was just the beginning of the island's incredible transformation. After World War I, control of Nauru shifted to Australian administration under the League of Nations mandate. World War II brought another occupier when Japanese forces arrived in August 1942. In the following year, 1,200 Nauruans were taken to Truk, now Chuk, to serve as forced laborers on Japanese military installations. In September 1945, Australian troops again took possession of Nauru under the former League of Nations mandate, and most of the Nauruans in Japan were returned home. The island became a hub of mining activity, with profits benefiting foreign powers while the local populations saw little improvement in their living conditions. It wasn't until Nauru gained independence that the islanders could fully claim their wealth. On January 31, 1968, Nauru gained independence from Australia. The nation experienced an economic transformation unlike any other. The government took control of the phosphate industry and reserves, creating the Nauru Phosphate Corporation, which would oversee mining and exports. In the 1970s and 1980s, Nauru's economy flourished. The island boasted the highest GDP per capita in the world, with figures exceeding $50,000 annually. To put this into perspective, Nauruans were wealthier than citizens of the United States or Switzerland. The government used the revenue to provide its citizens with unparalleled benefits. Education and healthcare were free, and homes were built for every family. The government even distributed cash payments to its people, creating a society where no one had to worry about money. For the first time, Nauruans experienced the luxuries of modern life. Cars, air conditioners, and expensive European vacations became commonplace. Even though the island had only 40 kilometers of road, imported luxury vehicles lined the streets. Nauruans enjoyed dining on imported delicacies, wearing designer clothing, and living in lavish homes. However, the culture of wealth also created a sense of complacency. Few people worked, as the government provided for nearly every need. Meanwhile, leaders assured the population that the wealth would last forever. The Nauru Phosphate Corporation became the crown jewel of the economy, and phosphate mining was the sole source of income for the entire nation. For a while, things were looking perfect for Nauru. But as we now know, wealth that comes from one single resource is fragile, and Nauru was about to learn this lesson the hard way. Phosphate mining made Nauru very rich, but it also caused big problems in the long run. So what led to the island's downfall? The issue was clear. Nauru depended too much on phosphate mining. Experts warned that the phosphate wouldn't last forever, but the government ignored these warnings, instead of investing in sustainable industries or saving for the future. Leaders wasted the money on short-term projects and poor decisions. For years, phosphate was the island's only source of income, and no other industries were developed. By the 1990s, the inevitable happened. Phosphate reserves were almost completely depleted, so it became more difficult and expensive to extract the remaining phosphate. And mining operations came to a halt. With the loss of phosphate revenue, the government's wealth quickly shrank and Nauru's economy collapsed. The government could no longer afford to provide free services, and the luxurious lifestyle once enjoyed by Nauruan citizens faded into memory. What started as a success story turned into a lesson about the risks of depending on one resource and not planning for the future. Nauru's story isn't just about economic collapse, it's also about the environmental ruination. The phosphate mining, which had made the island rich, also destroyed much of its natural environment. The damage was so severe that the island's landscape is now almost unrecognizable. Over 80% of Nauru's soil and vegetation has been stripped bare, leaving behind a desolate landscape of jagged limestone pinnacles. The land was so heavily mined that its fertile topsoil was gone and became nearly unsuitable for agriculture or habitation. The once thriving ecosystems on the island were destroyed, and the soil that had sustained the islanders for thousands of years was lost, leaving behind wasteland. The loss of arable land forced Nauru to rely on imported foods, which was expensive and unhealthy. Imported processed foods became the primary diet, leading to one of the highest obesity rates in the world. Today, nearly 80% of Nauru's population is classified as overweight or obese, contributing to widespread health problems like diabetes and heart disease. In addition to the destruction of the land, phosphate mining also polluted Nauru's freshwater supply. The island relies on underground aquifers for drinking water, but these were contaminated by the mining. As a result, the government had to invest in expensive desalination plants to provide drinking water to the population. This added another financial burden to an already struggling economy. Rehabilitation efforts have been unsuccessful in many areas. The damage caused by mining was so extensive that it was difficult, if not impossible, to restore the land to its original state. Attempts to plant vegetation and restore the environment have failed, leaving the island with a long-lasting environmental crisis that mirrors its economic collapse. Financial mismanagement and corruption further contributed to the downfall of Nauru. While the phosphate industry generated billions of dollars, much of its wealth was squandered. Nauru's leaders invested in risky and often bizarre ventures, including a failed airline, luxury hotels, and a Broadway musical. Many of these projects ended in financial disaster. Corruption further drained the nation's resources. Officials used public funds for personal gain, and little effort was made to ensure the long-term stability of the economy. By the early 2000s, Nauru's once thriving trust fund was completely depleted. The government was bankrupt, and the population was left to bear the consequences. Nauru's fall from grace was swift and brutal. The collapse of the island's economy did not only impact the government, it devastated the lives of ordinary citizens. As the country's wealth evaporated, so did the standard of living for Nauruans. With no phosphate income and no alternative industries, the island was plunged into poverty. Unemployment skyrocketed, with over 90% of the population out of work. and the island's youth began to leave in search of better opportunities abroad. Those who stayed behind faced a future of limited prospects and a deteriorating quality of life, as the government relied heavily on foreign aid to provide basic services. In a desperate attempt to generate revenue, Nauru agreed to host detention centres for asylum seekers on behalf of Australia. While this provided some financial relief, it also brought international criticism. Many accused Nauru of exploiting vulnerable people for profit, further tarnishing the nation's reputation. Over 90% of Nauru's land remains unusable due to environmental destruction. Health problems also skyrocketed. Nauru now has one of the highest rates of obesity and diabetes in the world. The shift to cheap imported processed foods, combined with a lack of physical activity, contributed to a public health crisis. What was once a healthy population was now struggling with chronic diseases that put further strain on the island's already strained healthcare system. The combination of economic collapse, environmental devastation, poor health outcomes, and financial disaster has made life on the island a daily challenge for many. Today, Nauru remains one of the poorest countries in the world. Nauru's story is both a tragedy and a lesson. It shows how incredible wealth can lead to complacency, mismanagement, and ultimately, collapse. But does Nauru's future have to remain bleak? With global support and careful planning, perhaps this island nation can rebuild, heal its land, and forge a sustainable future. What do you think? Could Nauru rise again? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of hidden histories and untold lessons.